one of the things that I think came out in the report was that the ethnological foundations of race,
Mm,
because they start from creating hierarchies between stocks of men,
mm,
ranking orders of racialized men as the basis of racial inferiority.
mm.
I think my training in Black male studies really helped us pinpoint the specifics and the nuances and the kind of thought that developed here at the university.
Welcome to PPLS Perspectives, a podcast bringing students and academics together to explore the research carried out by the University of Edinburgh School of Philosophy, Psychology and Language Sciences and the impact this work has on society.
Welcome to the new season of the PPLS Perspectives podcast. I'm Tony Baugh. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in philosophy here at the University of Edinburgh. And today we have a special guest, philosopher Tommy Curry. Tommy Curry is the personal chair in Africana philosophy and Black male studies at the University of Edinburgh, which means that I want to make sure I say this, he is the only Black philosopher to be a professor of philosophy at the University of Edinburgh in its 442-year history. So I wanted to make sure I set that forth rightly. And he is here with us today. He's also the author of several academic papers and 3 books, so far as I know. The Treatise of William H. Ferris, the African selected readings from the African Abroad, or his Evolution in Western Civilization, which was published in 2016. Another White Man's Burden, Josiah Royce's Quest for a Philosophy of White Racial Empire, which was published in 2018. And his most celebrated and controversial text, The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemma of Black Manhood, which was published in 2017, which would go on to win him an American Book Award in 2018. And he is here with us today to speak about his involvement in the much publicized University of Edinburgh Race and History Review. And I'm so glad to have him with us. Professor Curry, how you doing, man?
I'm well, brother. I'm well. How are you?
Good, man. Doing good. How's everything going with you?
It's going well. Getting a little
Good.
tired though. Been
Okay.
traveling a lot.
All right. How's your family doing?
Family's doing well.
Good, man.
Doing well.
Good, man. Good. Well, Professor Curry, please tell us about your work, some current things that you're working on, and just kind of introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know what scholarship that you are engaged in. I know that you work around matters of race and gender and politics, but please just tell us a bit more about your scholarship.
No, thank you. Well, as you know, I'm working on the sequel to The Man Not.
Okay.
It's called At the Horizon of Man. So I'm very excited for that. I'm halfway done with it. And it's been a lot of work because, I'm really trying to bridge the historical and philosophical concepts with the social scientific. And anytime you're trying to speak to a philosophy audience, in a majority white field, it's very, very difficult to articulate principles that discuss Black males, right, as men and boys, that elicit compassion and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also working on a piece looking at the intellectual history and the development of ethnology, which was the 19th century field of race, as we know here, that really took off strongly at the University of Edinburgh. So one of the things that I think came out in the report was that the ethnological foundations of race, because they start from creating hierarchies between stocks of men, ranking orders of racialized men as the basis of racial inferiority. I think my training in Black male studies really helped us pinpoint the specifics and the nuances and the kind of thought that developed here at the university. So my ongoing projects are both building on the race review that I co-chair with Nikki Frith, and is also kind of pushing forward my extended interest in the research around Black male studies.
Okay. Yeah, that's I'm looking forward to that sequel, man. The Man Not. That's beautiful, man. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you when it's going to come out, but I yeah, I can't wait.
It's coming soon. Coming
Okay,
soon.
cool. All right, let's go ahead and kind of jump right in, man. The race review.
Yes.
For those of you who do not know, there was a race review that was published uh, and co-chaired by Professor Curry here, and it gained a kind of publicized, almost a firestorm. It was published by the university or at the university, but it was covered by the Guardian in July, and so people have been talking about it in the academy. But I want to kind of branch out from the academy and to have you explain why the race review was called, and also uh, what the race review is about. I've read it; it's 130 pages, and so I'm asking Professor Curry to really distill 130 pages into a few sound bites, but he's capable. I just want to tell a little story. So we went out to eat a year ago, and one thing I've come to admire about Professor Curry is how he can take these broad, large issues and winnow them down and to make them palatable and accessible. Because this woman, I won't say her name, but she asked him to describe his work. And it was like we were out eating, and it's fine. You can ask that question, but we were eating, and she really asked this man to talk about his entire body of work, and it was just like and he did it in, I swear, people, in 5 minutes. This man, it was like he was just prepared. He has a gift for that, so I want him to use that gift to distill these kind of broad issues and to really make them accessible and to really describe, what the race review is, and also tell us why it was called, sir.
Well, let's start with why it was called. So, as we know, around 2020, 2021, there's a swell in both American academia as well as in the UK higher education sector around George Floyd. Uh, Years before that, there was push and pressure for UK universities to kind of make amends or start investigating their legacies of slavery and colonialism. I think you see this with places like we saw this with Oxbridge, right? When they let out their report, Glasgow here in Scotland, tracing their histories of colonialism, specifically in the West Indies and the Caribbean, and Edinburgh kind of followed suit. Principal Peter Matheson was interested in understanding the legacies of colonialism, the legacies of enslavement, and that remit that he initially ordered, following these kinds of similar endeavors by other universities, was a little bit expanded once we saw the imperial conquest and colonial epic with Israel over Palestine. Uh, so I think that the review was called as a way to kind of assess the history, and we knew the history was going to be ugly, right? But assess the history of the Scottish Enlightenment, as well as its colonial spheres in Asia and even in Palestine. Now, one of the things that I think is important about this kind of remit, about the report, kind of get into what it is that unlike other reports, it centers on the institutional picture of the University of Edinburgh as well as its historical legacy. And that was something that was very important because most of the reports coming from Glasgow, from Cambridge, etc., they all presented the issue of contribution. Well, how did certain how did people within the institution benefit financially from enslavement, colonialism, etc.? We understand that's a major part of these kinds of reports and endeavors. We saw that here with the funding of Old College. We saw that with different sets up like the Cohen Trust, etc. But the other part about this is, especially for the University of Edinburgh, how did certain forms of knowledge about racialized thinking and sciences become cemented here and then launch entire fields dedicated to proliferating the ideas of Black inferiority? So, just as the university loves to claim the Scottish Enlightenment as the birthplace of scientific knowledge and inquiry, right? Well, one of those scientific knowledges was the idea that the skin complexion of African people made them inferior. So the report situates itself across a few different areas. The first of which is intellectual history, specifically the birth of ethnology or the rise of ethnology here, which is really important because there is a case to be made that in the Anglo-speaking world, that the University of Edinburgh was the first grounding of ethnological science. Now, when coming from Germany, you had ethnography, which was its study of the migration of different European peoples, which certainly transferred here, right? So we know that Johann Lavender's theory of physiognomy took root here in at the center in the city of Edinburgh,
Wow.
and that's despite the fact that it was already rejected by someone like Immanuel Kant in
Mm-hmm.
1798 in his pragmatic anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very interesting idea that you had Germans, or some Germans, I should say, rejecting physiognomy being embraced here in Edinburgh in the English speaking world. The second piece of it, of course, is the material history, tracing the financial aspects, contributions of that alumni, professors, different, institutional actors accrued on the basis of slavery and colonialism. The third aspect of the report looked at attitudes on campus, and then we thought that this was very important. This was kind of the social sciences in me that wanted to understand. Well, now that we know that there's an intellectual history of racism and racial science here, we know that there's contribution, but what's the institutional picture of the University of Edinburgh? How are people thinking about non-white people on campus, and how do the white majority, both as staff and students, understand themselves? And to really get a picture of that, we not only looked at attitudes, but we looked at, and this is the fourth part, we looked at the constitution of the staff and faculty here. We have no UK university, to my knowledge, has publicized and disaggregated their faculty and student numbers. So often, as you know, in the UK, there's this kind of a glamour, this conglomerate of BAME, right? Kind of like POC, people of color in America. And people really just report that. So you basically have the white conglomerate, and then you have this disaggregated mass of Black, Asian, and other ethnic minorities. And we rarely pull those apart. So we don't really understand what's happening, say, specifically with Asian faculty and students. We don't understand what's happening specifically with Black faculty and students, right, or other ethnic minorities. And what we wanted to do was disaggregate that so we have a better understanding of how each particular group is existing, understanding, and relating to the institution. And lastly, this is certainly important. The co-chair, Nikki Frith, she co-directed, or she really did a huge piece on community engagement. So together, we really, under her leadership, we really went into communities, community actors, community stakeholders to see how they perceived the university and how they saw the university to either be derelict or fulfilling its obligation to the broader community of non-white actors. And that the totality of those research pieces, that research design, is what really gave us the large report. It tried to not only assess the historical legacy, but it wanted to look at the institutional manifestation of anti-Blackness, xenophobia, and other forms of racism and ethnic discriminations that I think a lot of other reports weren't willing to tackle at the time.
Yeah, I read the report, and I thought it was really great how you broke it down into three strands. Like the first strand was about enslavement and colonialism and the university's involvement in that, and the second strand was about race and civilization from 1750 to 1850. And the third strand was about new forms of colonialism in Palestine and the involvement in that. And I want to get to Palestine later if we have time, because today is October 7th, obviously. And so, but in the first strand, though, there was some language. I just want to run this by you. I want to see what you think about this. Is that there's a line in it that was really powerful to me. It said how the university, in a discreet way, that word discreet just popped out at me. In a discreet way, through enslavement, how enslavement really, I should say, in a discreet way, contributed to the wealth of Scottish institutions.
Yes.
And I just like this because I really think that's really how it is. Because I don't know, maybe we're both Americans, and so I found this since I've been here that it seems as though racism is not really observed in terms of being a phenomenon. Classism is.
Yes.
Like in our home country, I think it's the opposite. I think that classism, we don't really have a class consciousness like we should in America. But we'll call something racist in a minute. But over here, they won't really speak to matters of race. They act like almost it doesn't exist. But when it comes to class matters, or class issues, like we had an email a few months ago. The students did. I think it was in the spring semester. We had gotten a couple emails like this, where the email, basically the tenor of it was, if you're going to Saint Tropez for summer break, or if you're going to the south of France, or to the Amalfi Coast, don't tell your classmates who are working class. They're working class. They can't afford to go there.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything like that. I was just like, what kind of stuff? Even I was a grad student at Boston University, which is one of the, the top schools in America. We never got an email like that. And so I just think it's really fascinating how they'll name class issues here. But when it comes to race matters, it seems to almost be something that they are repressed to speak about. And so when it comes to the idea of discrete kinds of contribution from slavery to the Scottish coffers, if you will, to fund Scottish institutions. Y'all list all these institutions. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was like, so many institutions have benefited from the African slave trade. Could you speak to that a bit?
Well, I mean, it's given the time I can't list them all, but let's say, I think there are two major aspects here that our researchers, this section was done by Simon Buck, outlines. There are direct contributions from alum, right? So people that were educated at the University of Edinburgh, that took pride in naming themselves as alum and students, that went off to work often, especially when you're talking about the medical school, went off to work in colonies and then send money back, right? And this is to me, this is what's important because it talks about the discrete nature. Like when we traditionally think about alumni contributions to the betterment of a university, we think about people who are invested not only in the time they spent here, but the vision of education that they received here. And it speaks not only to the loyalty that many of these, kind of racist doctors or racialist, scientists had, the affinity they had for the university, but also the affinity they had for what they've learned here. And that says a lot because, as you say, to directly name racism, specifically anti-Black racism, as operating within Scotland, is something that people have been very hesitant to do. And I think that you can see even in the debates that have been had, between, say, myself and people like Tom Define and these other, public intellectual commentators, there's a profound disowning of history. So someone like Divine, for instance, likes to read history as if it's all white, that the only actors that we can blame are white actors and the debates they had between each other. Whereas the same time you had the University of Edinburgh, proliferating the theories of people like a Douglas Stewart or Adam Ferguson or even certainly a James Cal Pritchard, you had Black people here at the university like Africanus Horton, who were fundamentally challenging that. You had Ignacio Sancho, right, who were challenging that. You have Olaudah Equiano, who's famous throughout London for challenging the slave trade. But those people never fit in. So so you're right. This is part of that baggage, is that when we read about the production both of contribution and knowledge, that it ends up being a question usually of, well, what did the white people think during the period of time? And you have a disruption to that narrative, right? Because you have Black people here in Edinburgh, you have Black people in the UK that are actively writing against these pseudo theories. But I think what's the other part about it is that the story that we should read the intellectual productions of people here at the University of Edinburgh solely in reference to each other continues many of the ideas that we're trying to problematize in the report. You see, the report isn't just about the financial contribution, right? A lot of universities have done that. It's immensely important, right? But the section that I work with Ian Stewart on, right, the section on ethnology, and this also tends to tell us about Palestine and the ongoing genocide there. It's about how intellectual theories, how concepts were used to frame other people as non-human. And what I've constantly tried to tell people is that, look, the report isn't a political report, it's an academic report. But what upsets people is the fundamental questions being asked about the nature of dehumanization. What we see is that the Scottish Enlightenment produced a form of knowledge that validated, verified, in many ways it was even honorific of the idea of white salvation, white knowledge, white reason, and white civilization. But it also created subhumanity because it asserted that the basis of knowing, the standard by which we know that white civilizations throughout Europe, specifically the Anglo-Saxon traditions, were great, was because they told us about savages.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what Dougal Stewart does. I think the most impactful, at least from the intellectual historian point of view, the most impactful piece of understanding the report is to realize that whereas the Scottish Enlightenment before would say, look, we were hands off of this nasty slavery,
Mm-hmm.
right? We were hands off of
Mm-hmm.
this idea that we were trying to really oppress black people, like the Americans were.
Mm-hmm.
You find out that when you go to the student notes, Dougal Stewart's actually teaching Thomas Jefferson and Sam Stanhope Smith's debates around slavery and the change of color.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So as you know the things Jefferson said about
sure,
it, right?
Sure.
And those for Virginia. But Sam Stanhope Smith had a really interesting claim. He said that look, when you observe the slave, you can tell that the field slave is the field slave because he's around Africans. His complexion and his features don't change, right? When you look at the house slave, though, we have a different story. He or she becomes lighter skinned. Our curly hair, right, starts to become longer and straight. Our lips become thinner. Our nose become narrow. Why? Because the contact that we have with the more civilized whites not only changes our interior values, but as they believe, interior value change has to manifest itself externally. This is one of the basic rules of physiognomy.
Right.
So what we end up looking at is a theory of racial change, adaptation, and complexion that takes as its basis white civilization as the standard. And it's not just that black people are at the bottom. It says that any advance of black people towards knowledge or reason results in them becoming whiter. And to me, that's a profound discovery, because what it shows is that the investment that these thinkers that worked at the university had was not only about white supremacy, but it was an explanatory theory of civilizational and cultural development, or what we would call culture now. So in both regards, the historical contribution, right? This what we're talking about, like the discrete support of white supremacy by the university, and then the blatant intellectual productions, right, of the University of Edinburgh as a foundation and a center of the Scottish Enlightenment, both contained and were both fueled by anti-black sentiment and colonialism. And I think that's especially important when you look at someone like Balfour and his visions for Palestine and the rise of Israel. We are not discussing a political sentiment. What we're observing, and this is just such a crucial distinction, what we have observed through history is that there has been a tendency by those who produce knowledge and claim that they're interested in humanity to dehumanize as the basis of creating distinctions amongst a group of people and who should dominate the conversation about whose version of humanity should rule. And if we step away, I think, from the political talking points, and I know this is very difficult to do, in this day and age, then I think we have a fundamental question that presents itself to us. On what basis are those who claim that they're interested in trying to fulfill the destiny of humanity, why are they so dedicated to creating the non-human as the basis for their rise? Why does dehumanization seem to follow every endeavor by Europeans to study and define humanism? Right? And I think that's a current that runs throughout the report, not only in the question of Gaza, not only in the question of enslavement and colonialism, but on the very question about what the mission of the university should be.
Yeah, it's powerful. I want to ask one more question. I don't know how much time we have left, but I wanted to just ask you about controversy, the concept of controversy. Because in that time that you're describing, of the time of the ethnologists, I mean, coming out of the 1700s, the 1800s, those ideas were not controversial.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you look at Kant, observations from 1764, he was 40 years old when he wrote that. So like, this is not like, oh, he was a young man, he didn't know any better. Like, this is like, no, he's a 40-year-old man. Like, and he's racializing the Europeans in a certain way. He has, the British at the top, the French, but he has, the Spaniards when it comes to the Europeans, at the bottom of the Western Europeans. And then he has the Africans at the bottom, and it's really fascinating, that kind of aesthetic theory that was not controversial then. In Palestine, today is October 7th, and this, to even speak about it seems so controversial today. It seems as though we really can't speak to the kind of horror that we're witnessing in a material sense with our own eyes.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could say a word about that in terms of, because there's a section, the third strand in the text is about kind of almost a comparison between the kind of divestment the university did in 1971 from South Africa and apartheid, but how there may be some kind of need for, well, certainly some need for divestment in their kind of funding of no the Palestinian genocide in some ways. So, I mean, there have been protests since I've been here.
Yeah.
I've been here for for a few years now, and so I just these matters that are controversial, not controversial. How do we really respond to them? Be they ethnologies, be they matters of neocolonialism, matters of even genocide.
No, listen, I think that's the perfect way to phrase it. It becomes difficult for us to have conversations, both I think as an academic community and as public intellectuals, because anything around Gaza, anything that mentions the word genocide, becomes a hot take. And given the accusations that follow now from the IHRA, where any discussion of Israel as an imperial state is akin to anti-Semitism, controversy becomes the name used to squash free debate and free inquiry. And I really want people to understand the importance of this. Coming from America, as you know, right? We know that the white majority has an incredible amount of power to dictate what can be seen, what can be acknowledged, and what can be spoken of. So even what we see today, a white supremacist like Charlie Kirk can be killed, and it's not even about, and no black people were involved. That's an important point. But then the nation could put it on the heads of black people, even though they had nothing to do with it. So much so that people lose their jobs. They've been kicked out of school because they don't honor the symbol that white America has told them is the basis of American patriotism. So when we come over here across the ocean, this is, and I'll just do a little caveat here. It's always funny because when I initially came here, people told me that, the UK was not America. That, you'd have to adjust everything to understand the UK. Right? And of course, these were white people telling me this. When I spoke to other black people and Africans, it was very, surprise. They're like, "Oh, welcome. We understand your experience.
Wow.
We want to talk to you."
Yeah.
But I say that to say that what we see happening today around issues of Gaza, around issues of race, controversy within the UK context becomes the name for that which should not be spoken. And as an academic, as a black academic here, that's a profoundly familiar feeling. So two things I think are important here. One, there's been a criticism of the Race Review because it dares to ground its approach to studying racism in black intellectual traditions. So you notice the review is not apologetic. It's extremely material. So, all about facts, figures, right? There's very, very little interpretive room there, right? And it's decidedly apolitical in the sense that it is interested in mobilizing the historical facts of the matter in an effort to show how you lead to a certain institutional outcome, right? People who want to attack the report have made very sophomoric kind of arguments that we've seen on the right in America. Oh, well, favoritism to black people, even though the percentage is like 1% when we're talking about faculty, right?
Yeah.
Poor white boys are more disadvantaged. There's a higher rise. Yeah, because you're not looking at absolute numbers. You have 2, then you go to 4, right? 200% increase or 100% increase, right? You're like, oh, but that rises faster than X. But of course, right? But that's what I'm saying. We've seen these arguments against affirmative action over the last 20 years in America, right? And of course, this idea that somehow there's another perspective. And this is what I want to talk about very briefly, because this really impacts how we understand Gaza. That there's somehow an objective perspective that only white scholars in the UK are privy to. And this as a black American really interests me, because it says that, look, when you conduct research on race, especially if you're black, right? Because somehow I've masterminded the whole race review myself, and according to some of these detractors, you're stained by it. So no black intellectual can ever escape thinking through and about their blackness. I'm not a black scholar. I'm a black person that happens to write scholarship, but it's always black. The repetition of blackness is very key for these people. And what I find interesting about that is that it's a way to always under-specialize and indict any work on race, anti-blackness, dehumanization, etc. Because it says that by its very nature of coming from a black person, it's not objective. Now, on the other side, this is what interests me about their argument. There's like, but there's a more objective and neutral perspective, and that really interests me. So the perspective that's born from an all-white audience, an all-white panel of intellectuals that have historically denied or not known about the relationship that Dougald Stewart had to Jefferson and Stanhope Smith in teaching about slavery as his kind of, example par excellence of racial change and adaptation. They don't seem to be bothered by their slip-ups, by their inability to account for these kinds of things.
Right.
So we've lived in a world for largely 400 years since I'm the first black professor of philosophy here at the university. So we lived in a time in their mind of racial objectivity, where stories of black inferiority were not mentioned. We're going through the archives and through the student notes were not needed, and where the pointing out of the tremendous underrepresentation of black, Asian faculty and students were never really an issue because it was a majority white institution and sector.
Right.
So the first thing that happens when we start bringing these things to the surface is it's not objective. And this is what I find interesting, is rupturing the illusion of white epistemology and control becomes akin to controversy. Now look at what's happening with Palestine. You have groups of people who are being killed, material fact. You have groups of people saying that Israel has a right to defend itself from the people that it's slaughtering. And at the end of it, we're told as academics that if we're bothered, right, this is what's interesting to me, if we're bothered by the slaughtering of innocent Palestinian civilians, women, children, and men, right, the work we do in Black male studies, we know that men are usually the first and most severe casualties of any conflict. We're told that shouldn't occupy our moral or intellectual interest. So much so, right? So much so that anyone who doesn't bend to the pressures of the colonial power, in this case Israel in this context, are not only immoral, but anti-Semitic. So now you take that very simple example and you ask yourself, how many times in history as a Black American man, have we been told that we're on the wrong side because we've challenged white supremacy, white terrorism, segregationism, apartheid, and murder because we've sided with the humanity of people who in some cases were prohibited from reading, prohibited from gathering, were prohibited from speaking for themselves or for their own humanity. You see, the similarities of suffering that you get from being a Black man from America, that horror and tragedy that you walk around with as part of your history and your existence, provides insight into the techniques and strategies that people use to silence those who would stand up against dehumanizers. And that courage isn't political, right? It's fundamental to the way that Blackness operates, which is why the Black experience translates to other oppressed people around the world so well. But to be a scholar doing that in a predominantly white sector, in a predominantly white country, that's upsetting. That's the controversy. Because it upsets the silence in the room.
Yeah, that's powerful, Professor Curry. Yeah, courage is not political. I think that's a good note to end on. I really don't have much to add to that. And there's so much to learn from the Black experience, especially when it comes to matters of liberation. And so I really appreciate that note. And so I think we're going to end it here, everyone. I think our producer, I think Joe's going to link to the race review on the episode, and we want to thank Professor Curry for joining us and spending time with us to really speak about these matters. If you have not read the race review, I encourage you to go read it and to be well and to keep in touch.
Hello, producer Joe here. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe? We publish a new episode every month from October through to May. You can also find all of our previous episodes available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube.